History has a convenient way of polishing the past, scrubbing away the grime until only the shiny, palatable surface remains. But if you scratch that surface, if you dig your fingernails into the golden era of the roaring 20s, you find something rotting underneath. You find a story written not in ink, but in the glowing bones of young women who were sacrificed on the altar of corporate greed. We are told that progress requires sacrifice, but rarely are we told who exactly is being sacrificed and by whom. In the shadowed corners of 1917, hidden behind the patriotic fervor of the First World War, a new kind of magic was being sold. It was called radium. And for the young women of Orange, New Jersey, it promised a life of independence, glamour, and light. They called it the dream job. While their brothers and husbands were shipping off to the trenches of Europe, hundreds of young girls, some as young as 14, walked through the doors of the United States Radium Corporation. They were the lucky ones, or so they thought. Their task was delicate, artistic, and crucially important for the war effort, painting the dials of wristwatches with a miraculous new substance known as undark. This paint, infused with radium, glowed with a ghostly, beautiful green luminescence. It allowed soldiers in the muddy dark of the battlefield to check the time. But for the girls in the studio, it was fairy dust. It was the stuff of stars brought down to earth. The pay was excellent, 3 times what a factory girl could make elsewhere. But the real allure was the status. These weren't just factory workers, they were artists. They sat in rows, dipping fine camel hair brushes into the glowing sludge. But there was a problem. The brushes were too coarse for the tiny numerals on the dials. The solution, handed down from the clean, well-lit offices of their supervisors, was simple, intimate, and deadly. Lip, dip, paint. Put the brush in your mouth to bring it to a fine point. Dip it in the radium. Paint the number. Repeat. Is it safe? The girls asked, giggling as the paint grit stuck between their teeth. Safer than table salt, the managers smiled. It will put roses in your cheeks. And so they licked, hundreds of times a day. Lip, dip, paint. They swallowed the poison with every stroke, trusting the men in suits who signed their paychecks. The deception was absolute. The cruelty was precise. While the girls were told the paint was medicinal, a cure-all tonic that would make them radiant, the company's own scientists and executives knew better. In the back rooms, the men handling the raw radium wore heavy lead aprons. They used ivory-tipped tongs to avoid touching the material. They knew that radium was a voracious beast that ate bone and tissue. But for the disposable girls in the painting studio, no protection, no warnings, just the order, lip, dip, paint. The girls embraced the magic. They were the ghost girls. After a shift, they glowed. The dust settled on their clothes, their hair, their skin. They were walking light bulbs, shimmering in the twilight as they walked home. For fun, they painted their fingernails and teeth with the residue, grinning like Cheshire cats at dances, dazzling their suitors with radioactive smiles. They didn't know they were essentially swallowing a nuclear bomb, grain by grain. They were ghosts long before they died, their bodies absorbing the element that mimics calcium. The radium didn't just pass through them, it hunted them. It settled into their bones, disguising itself as a building block of life, only to begin a slow, silent bombardment from the inside out. The U.S. Radium Corporation didn't just hire workers, they harvested them. They capitalized on innocence and sold death as beauty. And when the first pains began, when the glow stopped feeling like magic and started feeling like fire, the company did what powerful entities always do. They closed the files, washed their hands, and waited for the evidence to bury itself. The unraveling didn't happen all at once.
It wasn't a sudden explosion, but a slow, agonizing erosion of the human form. It began in the silence of a bedroom, with a dull ache that wouldn't go away. Molly Maggia was lively, sociable, and young, too young to feel so old. It started with a toothache, a simple, mundane pain that we all know. But for Molly, this was the first bell tolling for her funeral. She went to the dentist, expecting a routine extraction. The tooth came out, but the wound refused to heal. Instead, it festered. It wept pus and blood, a dark, angry ulcer blooming in her mouth. Then the tooth next to it began to ache. Then another. The dentist, baffled and horrified, watched as Molly's mouth became a ruin. In a scene that seems too grotesque for reality, but is documented in the cold, clinical notes of the time, the dentist reached in to gently probe her jawbone. He didn't need tools. He didn't need force. With just his fingers, he lifted the jawbone out of her mouth. It had separated from the skull. It was gray, porous, and dead. The radium had done its work, honeycombing her bones, eating away the structure until she was literally falling apart while still breathing. Her jaw was gone, but the pain remained, migrating to her hips, her feet, her spine. She was disintegrating. Molly Maggia died in 1922 at the age of 24. Her death was a horror show. The infection had spread to her throat. The official cause was that she choked on her own blood as her jugular vein ruptured. But the U.S. Radium Corporation was not content with merely killing her. They needed to murder her reputation, too. If the world knew that their miracle paint caused a woman's jaw to crumble, the stock price would plummet. The ghost girls would stop painting. The profits would stop glowing. So the company unleashed its second weapon, slander. They bribed medical examiners. They pressured doctors. When Molly's death certificate was filed, it didn't say radium poisoning. It didn't say industrial necrosis. It read syphilis, a disease of ill repute, a moral failing. It was a masterstroke of villainy. By branding Molly with this diagnosis, they shamed her grieving family into silence. Who would want to drag that charge into a public courtroom? It told the other girls who were now feeling the same aches, the same deep bone pain, that their sickness was their own dirty secret. It was a lie designed to isolate the victims, to make them fear the judgment of society more than the poison in their veins. The company doctors, paid hacks in white coats, examined the other girls. "You're fine," they lied, as X-rays showed bones that looked like moth-eaten lace. "Just a little anemia," they said, as girls developed sarcomas the size of grapefruits. They played a game of attrition. They knew the radium was incurable. They knew these women were walking corpses. The strategy was cold and simple. Stall. Deny, deflect. If they could keep the truth hidden long enough, the witnesses would all be dead. The living dead, as the newspapers would later call them, were trapped in a nightmare where their own bodies were the prison, and their former employers were the wardens holding the keys to the truth. But the company underestimated one thing. They underestimated the fury of women who have nothing left to lose. They thought they were burying trash. They didn't realize they were planting seeds of a revolution that would tear their empire to the ground. Grace Fryer was not a woman who broke easily. Even as her spine crumbled and her teeth loosened, her will hardened into something unbreakable, something stronger than the brittle bones the radium had left her. She watched her friends die. She watched the company spit on their graves with lies about syphilis, and she decided that she would not go quietly into that glowing night. But finding justice in the 1920s against a corporate titan was like trying to stop a freight train with a whisper. Lawyer after lawyer turned her away. They were afraid. They were bought, or they simply didn't believe that a watch dial factory could be a slaughterhouse. Finally, she found a champion, Raymond Berry, a young attorney who saw the monstrous truth hidden in the medical files. He agreed to take the case, but the U.S. Radium Corporation had time on its side, and they knew it. The women didn't. Every day the trial was delayed was a victory for the company. They launched a legal war of attrition, filing motions, requesting adjournments, using every trick in the book to push the court dates further and further away. Their strategy was morbidly transparent. Wait for the plaintiffs to die. Why settle a lawsuit when the accusers are 6 feet under? The press caught wind of the stalling tactics. The headlines screamed, "The Legion of the Doomed, the Living Dead." The public, once enamored with the miracle of radium, was now horrified. The courtroom became a theater of tragedy. When the trial finally began, it was a spectacle that broke the heart of the nation. The ghost girls arrived, but they couldn't walk. They were carried in or hobbled on canes, their bodies frail and twisted. Grace Fryer couldn't even raise her right arm to take the oath. The radium had eaten the joint away. She had to lift it with her left hand. There they sat, dying women facing the well-fed, healthy executives who had signed their death warrants. The juxtaposition was stark. The company brought in experts who claimed the women were hysterical, that radium was safe, that they were simply sick from natural causes. But the evidence was in the room. It was sitting in the witness chair. One of the girls pulled a piece of her own jawbone from her purse, a grim relic she carried as proof. The judge, the jury, the world could not look away. The U.S. Radium Corporation saw the tide turning. The public outcry was deafening. They settled. It wasn't the millions the women deserved, and it wasn't a cure. There was no cure, but it was an admission. They paid for medical and legal expenses and a stipend for the rest of the girls' shortened lives. But the victory wasn't in the money. It was in the precedent. The Radium Girls' fight laid the bedrock for modern occupational safety laws. It established the right of a worker to sue an employer for damages. It created the concept that a corporation is responsible for the safety of its employees. Grace Fryer and her sisters in pain died soon after. They didn't live to see the old age they had worked so hard to secure. But in their decay, they built a fortress of protection for every worker who came after them. They were told to be quiet, to be ashamed, to die in the dark. Instead, they shone, not with the toxic green of the radium paint, but with the searing, blinding light of truth. They forced the world to look at what had been done to them. The history books tried to close over them, to file them away as a medical curiosity. But we remember. We say their names: Molly Maggia, Grace Fryer, the women who were poisoned for profit and who, from the grave, reached back to stop the hand that held the brush. Their jaws may have fallen, but their voices, loud, clear, and demanding justice, echo forever. They are the reason we know that the safety of a human life is worth more than the glow of a clock face in the dark.